Hello, Contemporary Issue students. Miss Edelin speaking. We're getting ready to read Stopping Illegal Immigration. Should Border Security Come First from Issue 14? And our yes side author is Mark Gregorian, and his article is entitled Comprehensive Immigration Reform 2, which begins on page 259 of the Taking Sides text. For your information, Mark Krikorian is an executive director of the Center for Immigration Studies when he wrote this article. So let us begin. There is a broad dissatisfaction with the current state of our immigration policy. We have in our country 11 or 12 million illegal aliens among a total immigration population of 35 million. The largest number in our nation's history and soon to be the largest percentage of the population in our history. Despite misleading reports to the contrary, the pace of immigration is not abating. In the past 5 years, 8 million people from abroad have settled in the United States, about half of them illegally. How should we deal with the illegal aliens who are here? How should we structure future immigration policy to prevent this situation from recurring? There are two major proposals before this House attempting to answer these questions, one by Senator Kyl and Cornyn, the other from Senators Kennedy and McCain. In addition, there are at least two comprehensive proposals before the other House. And of course, the administration has its own proposal. The plans differ widely, but most have some form of legislation, i.e. amnesty, for illegal aliens already here, plus provisions to import large numbers of foreign workers in the future, whether through guest worker programs or large increases in permanent immigration. Rather than examine the minutiae of the various measures, I want to address some of the fallacies that pervade the discussion of immigration in general and of amnesty and foreign worker schemes in particular, in order to offer some principles by which to judge the soundness of the various proposals. Immigration is not inevitable. The bedrock assumption underlying most of the immigration plans being offered is that the flow of workers from Mexico and elsewhere is unstoppable, a natural phenomenon like the weather or the tides, which we are powerless to influence. Therefore, it is said, managing the flow in an orderly and lawful manner is preferable to the alternative. On the surface, the flow of Mexican immigration may seem inevitable. It is very large, rapidly growing, and spreading throughout the country. But a longer view shows that this flow has been created in large part by government policies. Both the United States and Mexico and government policy having created that migration flows, government policy can interrupt the flows, though a social phenomenon like this is naturally more difficult to stop than to start. Migration is often discussed in terms of pushes and pulls. Poverty, corruption, oppression, and general societal dysfunction impel people to leave their homeland, while high wages and expanded economic and social opportunities attract people to this country. While true, this analysis is incomplete because it overlooks the connection between the sending country and the receiving country. No one wakes up in Timbuktu and says, "Today I'll move to Milwaukee." Migration takes place by way of networks of relatives, friends, and acquaintances and fellow countrymen, and few people immigrate to a place where those connections are absent. Consider two countries on the other side of the planet, the Philippines and Indonesia. These neighbors both have large, poor populations and share many cultural similarities. Yet there are more than 1 million Filipino immigrants in the United States and only a handful of Indonesians. And annual immigration from the Philippines is routinely 40 to 50 times greater than immigration from Indonesia. Why? Because the ties between the United States and the Philippines are numerous and deep. Our having ruled the country for 50 years and maintained an extensive military presence there for another 50 years. On the other hand, the United States has very few ties to Indonesia, whose people tend to migrate to the Netherlands, its former colonial ruler. At the end of the Mexican War in 1848, there were only a small number of Mexican colonists living in the Southwest, many of whom soon returned to Mexico with the Mexican governor's assistance. The immigration of Mexican workers began in a small way with the construction of the railroads beginning in the 1870s and later with the expansion of other industries. But beginning in the 1870s, but the process of mass migration northward to the United States and the development of the networks which made further immigration possible began in earnest during the Mexican Revolution of 1910 and 1920. The Cristero Rebellion of the late 1920s was the last major armed conflict in Mexico and was centered in the states of west central Mexico. Partly to prevent future trouble, the newly consolidated Mexico City regime adopted a policy of encouraging immigration from these very states. The power of government-fostered migration networks is clear from the fact that even today these same states account for a disproportionate share of the Mexican immigrants to the United States. On the U.S. side, federal policies that established migration networks between the United States and Mexico arguably began in the 1920s when Congress specifically excluded the Western Hemisphere from the newly enacted immigration caps so as not to limit the flow of Mexican immigrants. Then, in 1942, the Bracero program to import Mexican farm workers was started under the cover of World War II, and it continued until 1964. About 4.6 million contracts were issued to Mexican workers. Many were repeat contracts for workers who returned several times, so that an estimated 1 to 2 million individuals participated. By creating vast new networks connecting the United States and Mexico, the Bracero program launched the mass illegal immigration we are still experiencing today. Illegal immigration networks were reinforced by the IRCA amnesty of 1986, which granted legal status to nearly 3 million illegal aliens, at least two-thirds of whom were Mexican. This new legal status conferred by the federal government generated even more immigration, legal and illegal, as confirmed by a 2000 INS report. And the federal government's effective abandonment of interior immigration enforcement has served to further promote immigration from Mexico. As a result of this series of government decisions, the flow of Mexican immigration to the United States is very large. The Mexican immigration population ballooned from less than 800,000 in 1970 to nearly 8 million in 2000 and is more than 10 million today, most having arrived since 1990. This rapid growth has created a snowball effect through the reinforcement of old networks and the establishment of new ones. If present trends continue, within a few years, Mexico will have sent more immigrants to the United States in 100 years than Germany, currently the leading historical source of immigrants, has in more than 300 years. Far from being an inevitable process with deep historical roots, then, mass migration from Mexico is a relatively recent phenomenon created by government policies. The same is true for most other sources of immigration to the United States, such as Cuba, India, Central America, Russia, Vietnam, and elsewhere. We have not seriously tried to enforce the law. A supporter of a guest worker amnesty program might respond that while interrupting immigration flows may be possible in theory, it cannot be accomplished in practice. And the proof of that is that we have tried to enforce our immigration laws and failed. We have done no such thing. Increases in immigration enforcement over the past decade have been confined almost exclusively to patrolling the border. As important as that is, enforcement of the immigration laws inside the country has declined precipitously, and without such a combined strategy, success is impossible. In particular, enforcement of the ban on hiring illegal aliens, the centerpiece of any effort to regain control of our chaotic immigration system, has been all but abandoned. We might date the abandonment from INS raids in Georgia during the Vidalia onion harvest in 1998, which caused large numbers of illegal aliens, knowingly hired by the farmers, to abandon the fields to avoid arrest. By the end of the week, both of the state senators and 3 congressmen had sent an outraged letter to Washington complaining that the INS does not understand the needs of America's farmers, and that was the end of that. So the INS tried out a kinder, gentler means of enforcing the laws, which fared no better. Rather than conduct raids on individual employers, Operation Vanguard in 98 and 99 sought to identify illegal workers at all meatpacking plants in Nebraska through audits of personnel records. The INS then asked to interview those employees who appeared to be unauthorized, and the illegals ran off. The procedure was remarkably successful and was meant to be repeated every 2 or 3 months until the plants were weaned from their dependence on illegal labor. Local law enforcement officials were very pleased with the results, but employers and politicians vociferously criticized the very idea of enforcing the immigration law. Governor Mike Johans organized a task force to oppose the operation. The meat packers and the ranchers hired former Governor Ben Nelson to lobby on their behalf, and in Washington, Senator Chuck Hagel, Republican from Nebraska, pressured the Justice Department to stop. They succeeded. The operation was ended, and the senior INS official who had thought it up in the first place was forced into early retirement. The INS got the message and developed a new interior enforcement policy that gave up trying to actually control immigration and focused almost entirely on the important but narrow issues of criminal aliens and smugglers. As INS Policy Director, Robert Bach told the New York Times in March 9 of 2000, story appropriately entitled, "INS is looking the other way as illegal immigrants fill jobs. It is just the market at work, drawing people to jobs, and the INS has chosen to concentrate its actions on aliens who are a danger to the community." The enforcement statistics tell the story in a nutshell. According to the GAO, even in 1999, only 417 notices of intent to fine were levied against employers who knowingly hired illegal aliens. But in 2004, the number of employer fines was 3. That's 3 nationwide. Tony Blankley, the Washington Times editorial page editor, summed it up last year. "I might agree with the president's proposals if they followed, rather than preceded, a failed, Herculean, decades-long national effort to secure our borders. If, after such an effort, it was apparent that we simply could not control our borders, then as a practical man, I would try to make the best of a bad situation. But such an effort has not yet been made. Amnesties and foreign worker programs can't stop illegal immigration. Even if it is possible to enforce the law, wouldn't accommodating the immigration flow through a guest worker program or increased issuance of green cards plus an amnesty for those already here be another way of eliminating illegal immigration? No. Putting aside their other effects, amnesties and increased immigration, whether permanent or temporary, simply cannot eliminate illegal immigration. To begin with, expansions in immigration, the sense seems to be that one economy demands a certain amount of foreign labor each year, but that the various legal channels only admit a portion of the needed flow, and the rest entering illegally. It would follow, then, that establishing a legal means for those foreign workers forced to come illegally would all but eliminate ordinary illegal immigration. This represents a simplistic understanding of both the economy and of immigration. Immigration always creates more immigration, and as the discussion above about the Bracero program made clear, the proliferation of connections created by the arrival of workers from abroad will continually expand the pool of people who have the means to come here, leading to more immigration, legal and illegal. In fact, a large body of sociological research shows that one of the best predictors of a person's likelihood to immigrate to the United States illegally is whether he has legal immigrant family members already here. I'm going to pause here and record a second one.